we pick up where we left off last Tuesday, and we're going to focus on YouTube content creators who are monetizing the culture war. One in particular that's in my sights tonight is the YouTuber Tim Poole. Why him in particular? Because he has literally monetized it. He has a podcast titled The Culture War. So that is something to consider. Give me one moment here. I have more windows open than you could believe. Thanks to everyone on TikTok watching. So, kind of moving forward here. And I wish my mouse would work better. All right. So, what I would like to do is set the stage a bit. In other words, kind of create a timeline of events. So again, another thing regarding this culture war, as Tim Poole's podcast puts it, is that Russia even took notice of this. So much so, they wrote a check. And, well, Tim Poole accepted it. Now, mind you, he claims victim to all this that he was unaware. So we will take a look at how Tim Poole's and Russia's motivations are going to align. So again, this timeline. So according to the Daily Wire, the Culture Clash podcast first aired on February 24th, 2023. His association with Tenant Media began with and was co-founded by Lauren Shen and Liam Donovan in January 2022. Apparently, he was approached to license content, and what that means is they are purchasing content for him to produce. It's different than sponsorship. So, I don't think. It was February 2023 where Poole had entered into a non-exclusive broadcast license agreement with Tenant Media, under which he received payments for his content. Around September 2024, a U.S. Department of Justice indictment revealed that Tenant Media had been covertly funded by the Russian state media employees, and they funneled nearly $10 million into the company to influence U.S. public opinion. The indictment alleged that Tenant's founders were aware of the Russian funding and concealed it by creating a fictitious persona of a wealthy European sponsor. Poole and the other commentators that are associated with this and Tenant Media, such as Rubin and others, in particular Benny Johnson is really coming up, stated that they were unaware that the true source of the funding was from Russia. And here is an example. I got this article up, but I have a really nice screenshot of something from the DOJ press release about this that really summarizes everything well. So check this out. And this is again from the DOJ press release. Many of the videos posted by U.S. company one, Tenant Media, contain commentary on events and issues in the U.S., such as immigration, inflation, and other topics related to domestic and foreign policy. While the views expressed in the video are not uniform, most are directed to the publicly stated goals of the government of Russia and RT to amplify domestic divisions in the United States. And there it is, all in black and white. And another example of where this comes from, a very good source of information, is this. These are the actual documents from the DOJ indictment. And here kind of begins the timeline as well. But they lay it out so well. It's one thing about legal documents. So check this out. Over at least the past year, RT and its employees, including, Kostya and Lena, the defendants, have deployed nearly $10 million laundered through a network of foreign shell entities to covertly fund and direct U.S. Company One. U.S. Company One publishes English language videos on multiple social media channels, including TikTok, Instagram, X, and YouTube. Makes you wonder about the purpose of what you're watching online, right? Or at least the intentions and motivations of others. So, again, these are allegations and they haven't been prosecuted, as they are claiming to be victims of this scheme. But motivations are a very important thing, and it's something to consider. So, Tim Poole's financial arrangement with Tenant Media, it involved substantial payments for his content. According to reports, he received approximately $400,000 per month from Tenant Media by producing weekly episodes, equating to about $100,000 per episode, making money. Minus News, according to them, to his engagement with Tenant Media, Poole's income stemmed from his independent media ventures, including YouTube ad revenues, sponsorships, and merchandise. Estimates suggest that his regular YouTube earnings ranged from $1,400 to $21,900 per month. I got that towards Incomepedia. However, these figures, they're not approximations, and his actual income can be much more due to the fact of like super chats, different things like that, from YouTube being monetized. Once you get to a certain point, as you all know, you can start receiving super chats and such things like that. So it's important to consider that there is like a notable shift here from his previous earnings, an extreme shift, and it highlights that substantial financial impact of his partnership. Pre-tenant earnings, right? Poole earned between $1,400 and $21,900 through YouTube ad revenue and sponsorships. But you compare that to the tenant-backed windfall, it's nothing in comparison. I mean, $400,000 monthly. That is insane, right? So now let's take a look at the monetization of his culture war. There's a business model here, right? Step one, you create the content that taps into that fear and anger because, as we all know, outrage equals clicks, a lot of it. Step 2, you package it as a fight for cultural survival for the betterment of you. And 3, you monetize, monetize, monetize. He's built an entire brand fueling division. And here's the kicker. His podcast is about the culture war. It is the culture war. An example that I have here are headlines. For instance, they are crafted and framed to produce a strong emotional reaction among people, often distilling like deterministic and compelling sound bites. And this tactic, it's not about understanding or bringing a blend of other sides to it. It's about driving engagement. And I'd like to take a closer look at one of his broadcasts that I think demonstrates this quite well. This is with an individual named Desmond on his podcast.
HoneyBook completely changed how I do business. I'm a photographer and independent business. It's a fact. Running your own business is
we have an example here from the Daily Mail. This is from February. New York teacher manipulated.
So keep in mind right here that the headline is teacher manipulated 5th grade student into transitioning, which resulted in tragedy. So we're going to talk about this, or at least that is how it's framed, right? Let's see what it's really about and what they're going to discuss. Think about how long they actually talk about that topic.
Grade student into changing gender without parents' consent, which drove her to consider suicide lawsuit claims. The response you typically get from people on the left is, it's an anecdote, it's one story. To which my response is, then why not just when Ben Shapiro comes out and says this is bad, you go, you are so right, Ben Shapiro, I'm so sorry this happened. Instead, the response you get is dismissal, saying, no, you're wrong, no, this doesn't matter, which then you basically have overt support from the political left in this country of things like this when they dismiss or defend it.
Okay. It's 2 questions, and I'm not even
So that's the hook, right?
that I'm right on this. I want to know if the teacher was gay.
No.
They weren't. The New York teacher that supported wasn't gay, right?
The teacher was, according to the lawsuit and photographs,
they're not gay, I bet.
Reading LGBT books to children and encouraging them to try being gay even if they were not.
Okay, is the teacher gay?
I don't believe the teacher is gay.
I don't think so either, because no one actually gay would ever say that. Like, no one.
Well, to be fair, we don't know.
We don't actually, and that was a complete kind of.
She does have blue hair. That
I know, right? And I'm so sick of like, oh my god, if you have colored hair, you're gay. It's like, I'm so sick of that, right? But like that idea of like, I don't think actually LGBTQ is trying to indoctrinate anyone. I know that word gets tossed around, but like, we're not coming for your kids. Like, drag queens aren't coming for your kids. Drag queens aren't trying to make your kids trans. Drag queens and trans people aren't even in the same freaking category. One's a performance and the other is a gender identity.
Well,
like, and actually, no, right? But here, oh, sorry.
You are correct. But
yeah,
now
but like,
you're seeing the blur and the blend where we actually had a debate between 2 drag.
Okay. So we're about 1 minute and 41 seconds in. And this is where it's going to change a bit.
And one of the drag queens says that they are trans.
Which is so interesting to me.
There's no rules.
Like, there's no rules, right? But hear me out. There is some logic that we can stick to, right? There's some logic that we could stick to, logic that I've been canceled for before and I will be canceled again, right? Blue self, alligator self. I will call you whatever the hell you want. I don't care, right? Pronouns are
Look at how she's communicating, or excuse me, this individual actually, they state that they are non-binary. I put in some effort to go and look at the pronoun that they might choose to use. And on their Instagram account, there was none listed. they just use their first name, a short form actually, Des. And so I'm going to refer to this person as Des or Desmond. And there's a point to that. Just making a little bit of effort to show mutual respect to an individual really makes a difference when you're going to try and have a meaningful conversation.
Kid says they want to be called Black.
Okay, great question. Fantastic question. I will address the first point and then I will get to that point. And I love, right? Blue self, alligator self. I will call you whatever the hell you want. I don't care, right? Pronouns replace.
What if a white kid says they want to be called Black?
Okay, great question. Fantastic question. I will address the first point and then I will get to that point. And I love that question. That idea of I will call you whatever the heck you want, but a pronoun replaces a noun, right? Cat self is not a pronoun. It doesn't replace a noun. It is a noun, right? So that's not a pronoun. Your pronouns are not cat self. You may want to be called cat self. And that's fine with me. I'll call you whatever the heck you want, but that's not a pronoun. So that's where I draw the line as an educator, right? Pronouns are he, him, they, them, it's like all of that stuff, right? And those should be valued, but I don't think we should also be like, well, I'm not going to call you cat. It's like, oh, what if they want to be called cat? Now, to that idea of like,
Race.
Race, right? Such a good question. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, right? Now, here is where
See how inclusive Des is? I want to hear from you. And and Des is validating their ideas.
differentiate the two. Being a gender studies major, right, which people have different ideas of, one of my biggest fascinations, both having my master's of science and bachelor's in gender studies, is where is the line between a biological difference and a social difference between men and women on a biological level, right? Where's the line, right? Where do we go, boys will be boys? And where do we go, oh, that actually is just societally okay and it has nothing to do with biology. So here's the thing. There are biological differences between men and women, right? I was featured in like, what is a woman? And I was like called out in that movie and I never even got credit for it. But like someone could ask me like, what is a woman? It depends on the context you're asking me. Are you asking me in a scientific context? XX.
So social structures, right? What we actually consider as a male archetype and female archetype. And Des is bringing in a new perspective. And mind you, we're about not even a third into this. So is the topic still teachers manipulated fifth grade student into transitioning, which resulted in tragedy? Why not frame this as Desmond brings new perspectives to the table for us to consider? Now, would that get as many clicks? Probably not. But is that what this is actually about?
Zone. Are you asking me in a social context? Self-identifying, like saying, what is an athlete? Self-identifying. But here's where it gets tricky. We know that there are biological differences between men and women. For example, women, oxytocin, better at communicating, better kind of at empathy. We have the chemicals to prove it. I have always identified with that ability, right? With that ability, I think it comes naturally to me. Hence the title non-binary, right? I identify with a biological trait that is usually kind of seen in women. Therefore, I call myself non-binary to help some people make that connection. Now, if you say, well, a white kid wants to be called black, what exactly are you identifying with that is black? Because by definition, if you think that black people act a certain way or do things in a certain way, that's racism. There's nothing different between white and black other than skin tone.
It's such a good point. The point being that the words that we use, these labels, are social structures, right?
Biological differences between men and women. There are not biological differences between white and black other than melanin, right? That's why if a white kid said, I want to be black, I'd be like, what's your black experience that you're experiencing? Yes, tell.
Well, I'll push back a little bit.
Okay, I want to hear this.
There are obvious biological differences between white and black beyond just melanin.
Okay, we got some muscle differences, height differences. I got you. That's fair.
Well, yeah, and I don't think the color of the skin or the race it matters that much. But obviously, sickle cell affects the black population.
It doesn't matter, but I'm going to bring it up.
Or so.
Absolutely.
But then the issue, we've talked about this quite a bit.
Notice how Desmond validates what he's saying. That's important in communication and also shows that they want to have an open dialogue. Whereas his statements are primarily bald and direct and black and white.
One of the arguments being made by gender ideologues is that we used to have racial segregation in this country.
Like that word, ideologues, it is such an interesting way to frame it as those who we usually define as that. And Des may actually consider themselves as an ideologue when it comes to gender. It's framed in a way where it is bad, right? Because the ideologues are doing it based on ideology rather than something bigger, like a concept.
And what was the argument for having black bathrooms and white bathrooms? There was a bit of a just moralistic, non-scientific view of what was supposed to be.
Right.
But then there were also arguments presented by people who were trying to justify why we had racial segregation, saying things like the danger, black people are different in this way and that there's risks. But the reality is, you get a black man from Somalia and a black man from Haiti, and they're very, very, very different. And then the only
and that validates her point, Des's point, in the fact that it is cultural, right? That these are social constructs based on our society.
characteristic is the color of their skin, which doesn't seem to actually help identify anything.
Thank you. Exactly, right? Like
There
my
we
black
go.
experience being kind of 51% Italian, but still identifying as black is very different than somebody else's black experience. So
Yeah.
1,000%. I have nothing to push back against when it comes
But
to that because
Gender
yes.
segregation,
Yeah.
everywhere you go in the world, you
Yeah.
find almost the exact same biological differences between men and women.
Okay, right. And that, which is why inherently, if you find biological differences between men and women, but on the circumstances where you have somebody that is assigned male at birth that identifies more with female traits, or a female assigned at birth individual that kind of identifies more with male traits, we have a biological category, not utter chaos, that we can kind of make a distinction from. Oh, you are biologically this, but tend to have these characteristics, therefore trans, therefore non-binary. We don't have that with the black population.
But if when it comes to gender stuff, why then surgery? If gender is social, why do you need to medically or surgically affirm it?
Do you want to take that one? Because that is such a good question.
Well, and I was gonna ask actually with regards to like sports and stuff, if there's this known biological difference, which I believe.
Go away ad. Eve, good game.
Online on Mac immerses you in a universe with thousands of stars.
Believe there is,
Mhm.
having sports competitions be changed, or the prison system and all of these
Right.
different things.
Well, that's like, but again, oh gosh, where do I even want to go with that? But like that idea of like the trans athlete in sport, I gotta say, like, I'm so like sick of that one, right? Because it's like such a niche issue that like no one should really care about, and yet everyone cares about
People's
it so much.
careers are being damaged. by it.
That's valid. That's
Yeah.
valid. But it's such like a specific. It's so specific to the point where it's like, oh, it's so constantly being blown out of proportion when I feel like there are larger issues. But that idea of like why surgery, right? And it's very interesting to kind of look at the different kind of LGBTQIA perspectives. That idea of to be trans, you don't need affirming surgery. But that I say my
And Des is so inclusive with their speech. And that's important.
of it should be accessible, and it should be. But what are the processes that we need to go through to make sure gender affirming care is beneficial? What guardrails do we need to put in play? I don't think banning it outright is a good situation. I don't think declaring, and again, this kind of goes into kind of reverse of your opinion, that idea of like wait for them to go through puberty entirely. That could be really, really kind of mentally draining for somebody who's trans, right? That needs to go
There's-
through a puberty. Yeah, tell me.
There's no argument against. I do not believe that there is any logical argument against what I said. If this system
And there it is. There's no logical argument against X. It is black and white. It shuts down the conversation. It shows that you're not open. No matter where you lie on this, communication is important.
rates are studied found to be between 60 and 95%,
Yeah.
then all you are doing by transitioning a minor is risking their suicide.
Okay, so hear me out. Desistance rates. First of all, those studies are. Have you seen those? Have you seen those studies? They're a mess. Like
That was no.
Those are like the smallest sample sizes with the most isolated geographic locations that I have ever seen in study. Like those are ridiculously biased. Not saying you're wrong, because I can't prove otherwise.
And that sample size, the things this individual's mentioning, it's very important. Like the population, the geographical location, it can result in getting a result that you want. And this is a tricky topic, right? There seems to be some politicizing of it. I think we can all agree on that. But it's such a small population at the same time that in order to grab good points of data, in order to make a conclusion, it's difficult. I would assume that many of these would be or should be small case studies. What they could try to do is gather multiple studies and do what's called a meta-analysis, which is a collection of studies and their information, conglomerating it together and doing an overarching analysis of it. Therefore, getting more points of data to come to a conclusion.
My only response is the left and the right both point to each other's studies and say they're wrong.
They're wrong. Absolutely. And 1,000% I could say like the left and the right. And I know it sounds crazy because like the way I look and the way I talk, but like I don't even say if I'm on the left or right technically because I'm a teacher and I don't think I should bring my political opinion into the classroom. And since I'm a media figure, I don't think
I love this person. They're wonderful.
Disseminate that information. But with that said, right, like that idea of like, okay, well, it's tricky. Okay, personal example.
But if the only data we have shows desistance rates to be this high,
okay,
there is no medical or scientific argument for transitioning minors.
Okay.
You have one study that you probably haven't read or even have the knowledge or ability to interpret correctly.
Oh, hear me out. Okay, here's a question, and I'll ask both of you this, right? Because as you know, right outside of San Francisco, very progressive family. Despite, of course, having the social pressures of society, I did not start dance until the 4th grade because I thought dancing was for girls.
Notice how Des uses personal experience in order to explain their point. It's effective. Very effective. When you can relate to that personal experience rather than the topic, specifically the topic, it makes a difference.
I didn't want to do something that was for girls. I did every single sport. I tried to be a boy so hard, right? And I had 2 moms and I got my nails painted and I went to preschool and you're not allowed to wear pink nails and I got them taken off, right? I can't wear nail polish anymore, Mom. But here's the deal. I did have progressive parents. I did start growing facial hair when I was like 12, right? And that did not work for me. It did not work. I don't identify as trans. I identify as non-binary. Facial hair, you look great, by the way. Facial hair did not work for me. It did not work to the point where I could not shave. Like, and I know that sounds weird, but that idea of not only was facial hair wrong, but needing to deal with facial hair was inherently problematic. My mom had to shave for me. Yes, I just said that on a live podcast.
You said you had 2 moms?
Now, what was the purpose of making that statement? Obviously, this individual, Mr. Poole, is making a point, right? He wants to highlight that.
They were separated, right? And that's actually, really good question that we can go into there, because then a lot of people are like, well, they indoctrinated you. No, they didn't.
And that's why he brought it up. That is why he brought it up.
But like, here's the deal. That idea of, hear me out. One actually had to shave for me because I was so against shaving. And did I get laser hair removal on my face at the age of like 15, 16? 1,000%. And did that make high school and college a lot easier for me? 1,000%. And that's a medical intervention that I did at a very young age, but it worked for me. And I actually, in a way, it supports both of our arguments.
Well,
right?
I don't think removing hair is comparable to sterilization.
Well, absolutely, right? But in a way, it's part of it is. But at the same time,
see how they're trying to bridge that gap, but they're saying that there's no connection at all to that. It's very closed-minded.
To the extremity, and I will respect that actual analysis that you just gave, right? But that idea of like, but it's crazy, right? It's crazy to me, like, to kind of go back off that, like, oh, well, you had 2 moms, right? That idea of like, oh, people think that I was somehow indoctrinated by LGBTQ, that I was indoctrinated by, my moms, I was indoctrinated by the Bay Area. It's not the case. If anything, if you talk to any queer or trans person other than the people that desist. You got to remember those people. But a majority of us, we fought against feeling this way and acting this way for a very long time. Like, we didn't just go like, oh, you know what would be kind of fun? To wear pink eyeshadow every day. That seems like a good idea.
But that's a social choice.
That is a social choice. Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to wear makeup.
Right. But it's a social choice that I had the right to make.
But that's not their point that Des is making. It's not the point. It's not even listening.
Right. And do we take that right away from kids? If your son comes to you one day after, getting one of these books, being like, oh, Mom, I want to try out eyeshadow. I think it'd be kind of interesting to experiment with that. My guess is would there be a little bit of pushback from you there? And if so, why?
I think for me.
Say something.
You wear the eyeshadow. No, I'm not kidding.
No. I really think with regards to these topics, with regards to all of this, we have a situation where I do think there's a variety of conflicting worldviews, but I don't think that.
So there's the frame of the conflict.
For my part, I don't think there's any comparison of facial hair removal to. I had only learned really probably maybe not even a year ago that the medications that are referred to as puberty blockers.
Her method of communication is so different. Look how she doesn't make eye contact with Des, the person she's communicating to, right? And she will only do it when she gets to the end of a meaningful sentence to make a point. It's very passive.
Oftentimes prostate cancer drugs. I didn't know that.
Or used to chemically castrate sex offenders.
Right. I didn't know that. And not only that,
all these extreme examples.
But the surgeries. So the surgeries like a double mastectomy or some of these various surgeries have serious consequences. And I think that, obviously
and that's a valid point.
Do as well. These are things that are highly concerning in regards to all of the side effects. And, I think medicine, it really makes me wonder why. Why would they be doing it? But also, just the overall health factor. There was a whole movement that probably still exists where people were saying that people shouldn't have the right to have their male child circumcised. And that was because, again, it was a medical intervention. And
right. But on that note, and that's the end of that video, I remember when a news article came out regarding in Africa, they were cutting the labia off of women. Now, of course, there are very bad side effects of this, other than the fact that, as we deemed it in our culture, quote unquote, genital mutilation. But doesn't circumcision have a similar effect? Aren't we mutilating what it should, originally be, like what we are born with? And aren't there also physical effects as well? It's actually pretty sexist, and it says a lot to our culture here, because it is common in our culture, but not in others. Anyway, moving forward from that point, I'd like to start to tie this together a little bit, and that is with a discussion of Russian motivations. But first, to just kind of conclude all of that, in that conversation, the way that Poole was communicating, it lacked nuance. It reduced these complex topics to declarative statements. And there's such a contrast, right, between Desmond and Poole and the other individual, not only with how they physically communicate, but how they articulate their point. for example, with personal experience, the validation of the other person's perspective, and bringing and influencing the other to have a sort of empathy with the individual. And also, with that validation and other means of how Des communicated, it brought a mutual respect to the table. And that invites dialogue by emphasizing that mutual respect and the validation. It really is a prerequisite to any meaningful conversation, which has really been lost due to this cultural war, in my opinion. So, moving forward, to do a recap of what we went over on Tuesday with Russian motivations and intentions. So, with the propaganda, their purpose is to undermine democratic institutions. Russia aims to weaken trust in American democracy, amplifying cultural and political divides. And it does this by promoting these narratives of division. They encourage skepticism of our institutions, governance, and democratic process. This creates chaos and distrust. It destabilizes social cohesion through polarizing rhetoric, leads to increased internal conflict, distracting the U.S. and us from external geopolitical challenges. And it's exploiting tribalism. Russian disinformation often fuels us versus them narratives, which I think we just demonstrated an example of that. And it pits Americans against each other based on race, religion, gender, political ideology, and socioeconomic status. All of this promotes isolationism as well. In other words, we stay out of foreign affairs, right? We don't get into Ukraine. And Tim Poole really changed his tone with the Ukrainian war. Really did. The amount of videos that were taken down, I think, were around 400, and many of them were framing Ukraine as the problem. Now, taking a look at Tim Poole's motivations. Let me pull this up real quick, just to show you where I got this. No, don't do that. Oh, did I lose it? Okay, sadly, I lost that. But all it did was show the actual source of where I got that information. And it was from Incomepedia, so you can see that for the future. But moving forward, give me just a second. I got so many windows open and things going on, I can't even express. There's a reason why there's usually more than one individual involved in this. So, getting back to like Tim Poole's motivations, he thrives on gaining revenue by engagement. And Tim Poole's content, it thrives on this high engagement, which is maximized through these outrage-driven topics. Now, of course, we have to be able to have conversation about these topics, and it's important, but look at how Desmond communicated and compare that to how Tim communicated his points, I would say that Dez's method was much more effective. It's calm, it's understanding. It doesn't promote that conflict. It attempts to bridge a gap of difference. And I think that is so important, especially now, right? Rather than focusing on those tribal instincts that we all naturally have, rather bringing a feeling of togetherness rather than exclusion and this polar way of thinking. So he drives on these emotional reactions, and he's branded as a cultural commentator, I would say, in my opinion, as that is primarily what he does. And that's primarily where he gets his engagement. He positions himself as this voice in the cultural war. And he has built a brand that relies on the persistence of these divisions. I mean, he is invested in this. And his success is dependent on keeping audiences invested in the conflict. Why would he want to resolve this when his gain is on continuing it? I mean, if that is his niche of sowing division, why would he change it up? Why would he bring people together when his paycheck is dependent on it? There is this ideological appeal to what he does as he frames his content as being about exposing truths or defending freedoms, things where it requires a conflict. And it resonates with audiences who feel alienated or antagonized by these mainstream narratives. But couldn't we change that up a bit? Couldn't we bring things together? I think there is a misunderstanding or this perception that we want conflict, but societies thrive on unity. And I think with what is going on now and in the past, as this has been going on for at least a decade, I mean, it has been going on a long, long time. But our unity is what gives us a future. So, kind of bringing this all together into a conclusion, looking at these motivations, what people have invested in this, I think it's safe to say that, Tim Poole was a tool in this. He was aligned with Russia's motivations. Maybe before, but definitely when he was accepting a paycheck as the rhetoric increased, right? The implications of this, where he may not intentionally align with the Russian objectives, but his approach to the content creation inadvertently contributes to the same outcomes Russia seeks, which is division, distrust, and the perpetuation of these cultural conflicts. And this alignment raises a lot of ethical questions and conversations to be had about the role of media and influences in either mitigating or exasperating social divides. Furthermore, I'd like you to consider that if an enemy's motivations align with another entity, So if X aligns with Y, does that not mean that it is inherently bad? I mean, I can enjoy a good time, but too many good times make a bad time. And right now, the amount of this cultural war consumption has reached that point of an ism, something unhealthy and harmful for us. The real war to be had is the culture war. Bring it to them, and that divide will blur. I guarantee it. So, gonna end a little bit early tonight. Thank you for watching.